So go back on this title bar thing into the MC start screen, and now if it's at 0 by 0, you see it's the registration point for the whole bounding box, not for where the actual text is. Now that might sometimes be a problem, but for now I think we'll be okay. We'll just have to move this manually, but that's alright. If snapping doesn't give me too much trouble. Sure, that looks okay, maybe a little bit more towards the top. Great. Now as you can see, this color doesn't really fit, so with the movie clip selected down in the properties tab, which I'm just shrinking there, don't click on the tabs unless you want to shrink them. Go to the color style, throw on some tint. You can see here you can select a color to tint it, all kinds of different options. Let's just make it a kind of a green. And here the amount. If it's all the way tinted, it becomes that color. If it's 0% tinted, it has none of that color in it. Let's just throw it around 50-ish. That looks fine. Maybe what we will do before we go on is just right click on that movie clip now that it's where we want it with the right effects, and go down to break apart. Now it'll treat those as separate text clips, and you see we've lost all of our tinting and color information, which is not what we want. So we'll just Control Z, Control Z, Control Z until we get rid of that break apart action, and we'll just leave it like that. This may give us a little bit of trouble later, but we should be okay. Just keep in mind that this bounding box is well outside of the actual text field. The next thing we're going to want are a couple of buttons, but we don't want those inside of the movie clip start screen. We want those to sit on the stage itself. So go back to the stage, stay in the same layer, why not? Actually, let's go ahead and hit the new layer button, and we'll just call this buttons layer. Just the more we can keep things sorted out and separate, the easier our lives will be. Now, these buttons are going to be down in the library, new symbol, button, and we're going to want, I'm just going to call it B for button, a help button. And it takes us directly into the help button, and you can see at the top here there's 4 different frames preset. These frames have sort of special behavior. Let's start with the up. This is how the button will look by default, and we'll just throw up a text box there, make it a bit brighter yellow so it stands out a bit more, and just write help on there. Shrink that down so it doesn't take up too much more room than it needs to. Great. And let's even go ahead and change the font on there to something a little bit different. How about Tecton Pro? Now you'll notice with the static text box, when I change the font, it changes what comes after, if the text box is big enough for me to type in, or not at all. Okay, interesting. Let's just select the text and go back down to Tecton. Great. Now shrink that back a bit. Okay, that looks fine. The size, haha. Make sure you go back to your selection tool before you try and select anything. The size might be a little bigger than we need. That should be fine. Shrink the text box down, and let's go down to our XY boxes and give that a nice 0, 0 registration point. That's this little cross here. If I zoom way in and then scroll up, you can see this little cross right in the top corner here. I'll just move that away. That is the registration point for this movie clip, and you probably want most of your assets to have a specific relationship to that. They don't necessarily have to be at 0, 0, but say this is 72 across by 50 high, we might want it centered on the registration point, which is 36 or minus 36 by minus 25. And then you have the cross right in the middle of the help. But for now we'll go with 0 by 0. Just wanted to point that out. And go back to a usable zoom. Let's have a look at the over button. For now, let's make that frame exactly the same as the first one. Insert keyframe. We'll change the color. Back to the text selector, select that text, and change the color to just a little bit more orangey. Fine, that'll show that you're hovering on it. Let's go to down It'll make down the same as over, except we'll go to our selection tool, we'll select that, and I'll just move in a bit so you can see what I'm doing. And if I press on the keyboard, I can just move that a few pixels down and a few pixels over, so it has a nice sort of clicked down effect. That's great. Go back to scene 1, make sure we're on our buttons layer, and I'll just throw that help button right on there. Let's go ahead and test this. Control Enter, and just have a look and see if our buttons are working. There we see our help button, and sure enough it turns orange when we're over it, and it moves a little bit when we click it. But you'll notice that it only turns orange when we're over the actual text. That's our hitbox. If I go inside the button again, the last square is for the hit area, which is where it's going to recognize that you're pressing on the button. For now, let's just go to one of our normal squares and have a look at the properties of that text box. It's 72 by 50 at 0 by 0. Let's go back into the hit frame and insert a blank keyframe, and we'll just use the rectangle tool to make a box. The color doesn't matter at all, and go to the properties of that box and make it, what were we, 72 by 50.1, and we'll put it at 0 by 0. So that should sit right underneath the help button. We could probably get away with making it a little bit smaller, but that's finessing for someone in the design team to do. Go back to scene 1 and test it again, and now you'll see anywhere in the box of the help button we're hitting it, not just over the letters. That's great. We're also going to want a play button. Let's do that nice and easy by just right clicking on the help button in the library and hit duplicate. We don't want it to be a help button copy, we want that to actually be a play button and not a copy. I'm going to put the B there to be a big B, just so that I have some consistency. Make sure it's a button, hit OK, and I'm going to double click on the name of the help button to make it a big B as well, because if some things are different, then it's not consistent. So we go into the play button by clicking on the icon, not the name. Go back to our text editor tool on the left, click in the help text, and change that to play. Grand. Let's go to the next frame, do the same thing. We'll keep the same color, but change it to play. Whoop, don't hit enter, that'll change your text field size. Go into the down box, keep the same offset, keep the same color, and just change it to play. And the hitbox can stay the same. If you really want to do something for no reason at all, you can change the color, because the color in here doesn't matter, just the area that is colored. What has an object in it will be hittable. Back to scene 1, make sure we're on the buttons layer, and throw the play button underneath there. Now we have these two buttons, it'd be nice to line them up. If I click and drag, even though I'm on the buttons layer, you'll see I'm moving something from the lower layer. So let's put that back at 0 by 0. And in our timeline here, let's click on the invisible for the start screen layer. Go back to the buttons layer, it automatically selects those things. Let's see, we have an align here. Let's keep that more or less organized and hit distribute vertically, which won't do anything because there's only two of them, and align them to the left. Are those lined up? No, they're not. There. Okay. Now we have those lined up. Put the visibility back on there, and we can test it again, but I'm just going to assume that the play... Well, let's not assume. Let's test. Test always, test often. That's fine.